Ripe Fruit is a nonprofit education initiative dedicated to identifying and strengthening innate skills as they appear along the spectrum of ways we think and learn. Our mission is to infuse mainstream learning with enhanced curriculum, customized lesson plans, and demonstrated creative systems. We aim to foster comprehensive learning, enthusiasm, and confidence for all students. The DEAN Talks serves as a conduit, think tank, and intensive to discuss how to identify and support unique learning styles. All systems are go. The DEAN Talks starts now.
Aching knees and a necessary pair of readers aren't the only effects of age that most of us over 35 have concerned ourselves with. Educating on the value of deep knowledge, keeping the pace of perpetual learning, awareness of diversity, acronyms, securing jobs in a digital-only or Gen Z-focused workplace, and combating the mental fog known as cognitive aging literally keeps us up at night. What is cognitive stimulation therapy? Should we ask for age accommodations in learning environments? What affordances are there for aged individuals? Should we assume cognitive aging in individuals of a certain age, and is that discrimination? What roles, jobs are a good match or better? Is America or the world growing more or less tolerant of the aging mind? Welcome to Nothing But a Number, the age edition of the DEAN Talks. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of hosts or sponsors or Ripe Fruit Foundation. This information is not intended to replace therapeutic or medical advice. This session is being recorded and will be live in Facebook and Instagram. Today, we are joined by a groundbreaking panel. We have Lily Liu. Lily, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lily Liu. My Chinese name is Liu Yijun. Having been a caregiver, a family caregiver for a mother who has had Parkinson's for 40 plus years. Good to be with everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have Rebecca Wellner. Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Wellner. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I'm also a certified dementia practitioner.
And we have Kyrié Carpenter. Kyrié.
Hi there, happy to be with you all. Yeah, I trained as a therapist, and after working in long-term care with folks living with dementia, got really passionate about ageism and ableism, and now I work as a public speaker and an educator, both at the collegiate and more informal level, doing workshops and things like this. Really happy to be here today and to learn with everyone about this.
Thank you, and we're happy to have you with us. Ryan Backer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan. I'm an age activist striving to undo ageism within an intersectional context. I have a degree in gerontology, and I'm one of the co-founders of the OldSchool Clearinghouse, along with Kyrié and our colleague Ashton Applewhite.
So thank you very much, Ryan. Glad to have you with the DEAN Talks. Let's open up the discussion with a video snippet to set the stage for the panel to join and react.
Aging is a natural process, and with it come changes in memory. Most people associate aging with declines in cognitive performance. My mom will say she's having a senior moment when she forgets something, for example. But never fear, not all cognitive changes in adulthood are negative. Some abilities remain relatively stable, and some even improve. So let's start with the positive. Abilities that remain stable. First of all, implicit memory stays about the same across the lifespan. In other words, once you've learned to ride a bike, that procedural memory is likely to stay with you as you age, barring any brain damage or disease. Recognition memory also stays relatively stable over time, meaning that once you learn something, your ability to pick it out of a list later remains about the same, whether you're 27 or 67. Now for abilities that improve. Semantic memory improves until around age 60, and only then starts declining. This means that older adults still have good verbal skills, and why they make excellent crossword puzzle buddies. A related area in which older adults tend to score better than younger adults is crystallized intelligence, which involves the ability to use knowledge and experience. Since older adults have had more time to gain knowledge and experience, this pattern makes sense. And crystallized intelligence is often tested with reading comprehension and analogy tests, so older adults tend to be better at those than younger adults. Finally, older adults tend to be better at reasoning in the face of interpersonal or emotionally charged problems. Again, the theory is that with their greater experience and knowledge of these types of situations, they're more likely to have been through some similar situation and be able to draw from that experience. Of course, there are some cognitive abilities that decline as we age. Recall becomes more difficult. Although recognition is stable, it's harder for older adults than younger adults to generate responses without cues, like there are in a free recall or sometimes cued recall test. Similarly, episodic memory is impaired. Often, memories formed a long time ago will be relatively stable, but forming new episodic memories becomes more difficult as we age. Processing speed slows down as we age, so if you're watching Jeopardy with Grandma, she might know just as many answers as you do, if not more, but she'll have a harder time outputting the response within such a short period of time. Related to processing speed, divided attention becomes more difficult. As we age, it becomes increasingly harder to effectively switch our attention between tasks, so we become more easily distracted. The bottom line is that cognitive changes in adulthood aren't all negative. Although some cognitive abilities do decline, it's important to remember that in healthy older adults, some cognitive abilities will remain stable or even improve.
Okay, so that's going to take us into our first question for DEN Talks. And that question is, what does age have to do with neurodiversity? Are we assuming cognitive decline in everyone over a certain age? And how do we know the difference between that and early signs of dementia, for example? Let's go to one of our panelists, Kyrié.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so I'll take the first question first of what does, age have to do with neurodiversity? So age and cognitive changes over age are going to compound with any experience we've already had of neurodiversity. But that's just going to be, for anyone, as we move through the lifespan, our brain's going to change. I love that video, the Khan Academy video you just showed, because it really does break down that throughout our life, the way that we think changes, and there's a normal pattern to that, a typical pattern. And if we're already experiencing neurodiversity, that pattern might not look quite as typical. But then I really love the middle part of this question of, how are we going to sort of parse out what is this pattern that happens across the lifespan for most brains, and what is cognitive decline, or looking at the early signs of dementia. And even in that video, you heard the speaker reference a senior moment. That's a quip we hear all the time for someone when they've forgotten something, to say they're having a senior moment. But implicit in that is this ageist and ableist idea that all older people are forgetful, and that being forgetful is a bad thing. And so I kind of want to unpack that. I think that's the sort of a really great starting place too, of just like that video showed, that our brains do change as we get older, but forgetfulness isn't necessarily one of them. As our Ryan and I's friend Ashton says, when we were in high school and couldn't find our car keys, we didn't call it a junior moment. So that, like, not knowing where things are, might not have to do with age. It might have to do with an ADHD diagnosis. But what we want to do is we want to get away from labeling that, because what we're doing is saying that all older people are forgetful and that it's bad. So it really is this ageist and ableist notion. Much more simply is just saying, I forgot. So I think there's something to unpack there. And also I love the way this video broke down that, while our crystallized intelligence gets better, while we're better emotionally intelligent as we get older, and when we're younger, we're better at recall and some of those faster processing speeds. This is a great way for us to check in on what are our current strengths and make sure we're playing to them throughout the lifespan. When we're talking about cognitive decline, cognitive change, dementia, we're actually looking at some different things. There's 6 different domains of cognition that are measured for dementia diagnosis, which now by the DSM, which is psychology's diagnostic home, is going to be called neurocognitive disorder. And what we're really looking for is significant changes in at least 2 of those 6 domains of cognition, one of which is memory. But we're also looking there at executive functioning, which is sort of our ability to put the steps together to complete a complex task. We're also looking at language, both how we understand language and how we can verbalize our own thoughts and feelings. And there's 6 of them. And so it's really important to separate out that, yes, while memory is one component of a dementia diagnosis, it is not the whole thing. It is not the only part of that phenomenon and that experience. So when you can't find your car keys or remember the name of that singer, don't start panicking and thinking that you have a diagnosis of dementia and cognitive change. Also, don't start panicking because that is not a death sentence. There are a lot of people living really well with dementia. There's some great organizations out there like Dementia Action Alliance, really promoting the voices of people who are living well with cognitive change, going back to that neurodiversity idea, and that to be neurodivergent isn't to be bad or less than. And even though our culture has a lot of shame around it, and research out of Yale with the researcher Becca Levy is actually showing that having these negative ideas about aging and about cognitive change actually make us more likely to experience dementia and that cognitive change. And having accurate ideas like the Khan video showed, and even positive ideas about aging, helps us not only live healthier and longer, but can actually help reverse the signs of mild cognitive impairment and be a protective source against dementia. So those are my sort of first thoughts about what you put out there, but I'd love to hear, we have such a rich perspective from all 4 of us here. I'd love to hear from some of the other panelists what they want to add.
May I just jump in as a family caregiver? Because what I hope to bring to the table today is my lived experience going with a parent to a test for cognitive decline. I love the fact that Ryan had mentioned intersectionality, because sometimes I wondered if the tests were more Western oriented. For someone who's an immigrant, my mother might not have even been able to answer some of the questions in the beginning with without any cognitive decline. So I just want to say that it's an honor to be here today with everyone. And I know that Ms. Applewhite has been such a champion. I was so proud that a few years ago, after she had published her book, This Chair Rocks, that she was representing all of us at the United Nations in the older day of the older person. And to know that someone like her and her colleagues here are doing such important work in this space. So I hope that we also bring in the voice of caregivers who are really on the front lines, seeing what the intersection of all these different, health equity issues, but also at the point of intersection with the medical system. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other panelists?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's so important that we listen to caregiver perspectives almost over everything, right? Because to your point, Lily, the research and the normative data that we use to categorize how someone's doing is really racially biased. It's racist, and it's a problem. So I do want to just agree with you on that 100%. And I do also want to say that, going off of what Kyrié was saying, when we're looking at the difference between, typical memory loss or typical changes in cognition, when we're getting concerned that it's dementia, it's because it's significantly impacting daily activities. So if you're having just a little trouble here and there and it's not significantly impacting you, that doesn't fit as well with that typical definition that we use for dementia. And then I also want to add that within dementia, there are so many different underlying pathologies, diseases that cause it. And in fact, with some types of dementia, some underlying pathologies, memory loss actually isn't a presenting symptom. And so, for example, people living with frontotemporal dementia, memory loss, is not going to be a presenting symptom there. We might see things that people don't understand to be different from memory loss. For example, if someone's having difficulty finding their words, people see that as being connected to memory, but that's a language problem, or a change in language. I should not have a problem. And so I think it's really important to just be raising awareness, increasing awareness about that as well.
Well, those are all, it's a lot of insight that's being shared. And again, to kind of echo Ebony's point, is we're in a changing landscape now with communication, with accessibility, And I think in some cases, we can certainly grow from this ability to connect in ways that we have not ever been able to do. And that's really one of the driving factors of the Dean Talks. Make sure that you follow us on Facebook and check our social media as the Dean Talks continue. Are there any other panelists that want to contribute to that question?
Sure, I'll just jump in and say, yeah, definitely. I think Dean Talks has explored, the problematic nature of diagnoses and how, it can sometimes put us in boxes that we don't necessarily belong in. Sometimes it's helpful to have a diagnosis, of course, to get services and certain things, but I think it's really important to question, why certain diagnoses exist, why certain assumptions around those diagnoses exist. It's something that's always changing, and even the language that we use around when we're aging, like even the idea of the word sharp, what does it mean? What does staying sharp still mean? What does that mean? What does still mean? What is that word? Why do we use those words when we're talking about aging? Because I would argue, after watching that video, it's brains are, pretty powerful forces that change, not necessarily, people always think it's about decline, but I think it changes in really unique ways for each person. So I think there's room for exploring that I'm really excited to explore with all the panelists here today.
You bring up a very interesting point, which is definitions. One of the things that I've observed over the last few years is how definitions, there seems to be this struggle, almost a conflict between political correctness, I guess, and defining the core topic or the core subject matter. So what we want to do here in the Dean Talks is, even though this week the term may have changed depending on what it is, and then I could certainly use LBG, start with LBG, then LBGTQ, then now it's LBGTQIA, as there's this constant evolution of terms in the, I guess, in the context of what would be considered politically correct. Here, the bottom line is we need to have the conversations, whether some of the terms may be considered archaic, or whether some of the terms may be considered very current. As long as we have the conversation, that's what we're here to do, is open these channels to have this conversation. Next, we have another video snippet, and then we will continue with this session of the Dean Talks.
Some that prompts the question, how old is too old? But why? Susan Spencer looks at the slights and wrongs of ageism.
Because I still am aging.
Teresa Harrison's approach to getting old never gets old.
You can tell I'm excited about my age.
You seem to be. Now,
Yes.
Why is that?
I've become more innovative. I've become more creative. I've become more curious.
At 64, her energy is impressive, as are her skills. The Baltimore-based technology company she founded handles cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. And when did she start it?
I was in my 50s when I founded George Street Services.
I mean, the stereotype is of the hotshot 19-year-old in the garage, right? With all these wacko ideas.
That is me. Just add another 30 years.
But in the tech world, those 30 years often draw unwelcome questions.
I've been asked my age. I've been asked, how long are you going to work? Aren't you getting tired? Are you going to stick around?
Do you feel like this has had an impact on, say, getting a contract?
I think it does, unfortunately.
Can you imagine someone in their 20s or 30s or even their 40s being asked those same questions, and yet for some reason it's socially acceptable to say those same types of things to a woman in her 60s?
Would you call that ageism?
Absolutely.
University of Oklahoma professor Julie Ober-Allen calls it everyday ageism.
Everyday ageism refers to those sort of minor comments, interactions, exposures that suggest that aging is undesirable. So it's things like, all the birthday cards making jokes about wrinkles and walkers. It's interactions where someone assumes that an older adult can't use their phone or other forms of technology. And it's also when older adults tend to believe some of these assumptions and prejudices about older adults themselves.
All right. So that now leads us into our second question, which, what are your thoughts on people in the workforce of a certain age who might be dealing with masking? And what does othering look like? So an example of that would be if you are, let's say, neurodiverse, and don't get so caught up in the term that we can't continue the conversation. And in the workplace, you have a friend and you have a regular conversation with your friend, and you disclose your neurodiversity, and now someone at the workplace finds out about it, and now there may be some, I guess, repercussions because of that. So does that cause a conflict between being transparent and trying to continue with what would be considered quote unquote masking? And we're going to go to Ryan to weigh in.
Sure. Thanks so much, Stephen. So yeah, masking is really about survival, I think. So for some people, it can start young, but it's, what we're looking at today is how people who are older mask and how, this is affects them in the workplace, and how the idea of othering affects them in the workplace. So as we saw in that video, again, the first video, people's minds change as they get older. And in the second video, we saw a great example of, the strengths that the speaker was gaining from growing older, and her mind changing, and, the innovation that can happen as we age. So this combination, as minds change, yes, there is some decline in some areas, but there's also, a ton of things that stay the same, and also a lot of improvement. So, those combinations of thinking really creates a diversity of thought, a diversity of the way that people think. So I think that, celebrating and appreciating and even, benefiting from this diversity of thought and how different people work is really important. So I think, reminding ourselves that there's no correct formula for, having a workplace work a certain way. Of course, there are best practices, but, we're always learning about best practices, and we're always improving from them. So I think also another important thing that comes to mind with this question is allowing for emotions and feelings in the workplace. I think for so long, corporate America has operated in a way that has avoided any sort of emotions and feelings, and that can very easily lead to feeling othered and having to mask, because people who experience othering, it's a horrible, I know from personal experience, it's a horrible situation. It can feel awful. It really it creates a narrow workplace culture, and essentially a workplace culture that's so narrow like that is bad for business, because you have so many people, instead of focusing on their work or what they want to produce or what they're working towards together, there's so many hurdles that they have to jump over to just fit in. So they're focused more on fitting in and getting along with the people that they work for, again, masking or hiding their true self, just in order to make things run smoothly. The masking happens because people are avoiding being othered. So another way of talking about being othered is simple bullying, and it can be really subtle. It can be almost unconscious. The bully can be unconscious, when we talk about microaggressions. And it creates this environment of inflexibility. I love, Stephen, that you were talking about the flexibility of language, and we can also talk about the flexibility of the ways that we interact with each other, because not allowing for diversity of thought and changes in the way that we think too, it does lead to like the second video was talking about, it leads to everyday ageism. And I would say it also leads to everyday ableism too. And I wouldn't want to work in an environment like that. So, before I pass it on to the other panelists, I do just want to say that an important question is, are we trying to produce as much as possible in a short period of time? Like, is that the work environment that we want? Or do we want work environments that are about working toward a more harmonious way of living with each other across differences? I think that's a really important point when we're talking about workplace culture.
Ryan, I have to jump in on that because I had seen that segment when it played on the CBS Sunday show, and I looked at her vibrancy as a CEO and thought to myself, there's data that actually shows the entrepreneurs are not really the young ones in the garage. They are of an age that is at least 30 to 40 years old. I believe the biggest, quickest, entrepreneurs who are innovating are in their 40s. And so after I looked at that, this is not specifically about neurodiversity, but I looked at my own hair. I still remember my mother saying, "Oh, you inherited your dad's genes. He went prematurely gray." So I made a point in dyeing my hair at the very beginning. And I still remember sitting there with the woman next to me in the salon, and she literally looked at me and said, "Baby, there's no going back now." And only now do I understand what she was talking about, the repetitive need as soon as the white roots or the gray roots showed up. But then I personally myself made a decision. I didn't want chemicals in my hair. It is what it is. And so I thought about that in the context of neurodiversity and how does one mask? How does one have to do what one has to do in order to survive? But I would hope that the ideal workplace has diversity of age, diversity of experience. That actually has been proven to make the best teams in innovation and actually execution. So I just wanted to share a little personal anecdote about masking or not, and I have chosen not to mask.
That is, before the other panelists weigh in, that choosing not to mask, it's very interesting to see how we are more receptive to the transparency of people now. And, now that's actually an option. You can choose whether to mask, so to speak, or not to mask. When if we go back just 20 years or 30 years, you really wouldn't have had that same option. So I guess what I'm saying is, in some ways, as a culture, we are becoming more receptive as we have opportunities to share these types of ideas. But it's just, there's a lot of work to do. And that gives me another chance to plug the great work of the Ripe Fruit Foundation. Any other panelists want to weigh in?
Yeah, I want to speak to both what Ryan said and what Lily said. So first of all, Ryan, I really loved what you said about thinking about productivity versus harmony in the workplace. I mean, that really spoke to me. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot because I see where people are happy and feel fulfilled in their work. And that is where they're connecting with people who are with a diverse group of people. We can get more done. Ultimately, it just depends what you're seeing as productivity. So I just really appreciated that point you made. And Lily, to your point, I think that parts of that clip were actually like ageist, like in and of itself, it had some problems. Like one of the things I clocked early on was that the narrator says, at 64, her energy is impressive. And I think that's quite an ageist statement. It assumes that people who are, in their 30s have energy, which do I have energy? Not always. So I did just want to say that as well. I think that, the fact that they talked about just how astonishing it was that she was in the position she was in. I think we do have to be really thoughtful when we're talking about that sort of thing. And people tend to assume that when you're saying something positive, that it's a good thing. But I think that there it was actually a little bit problematic, a lot problematic, maybe.
Any other panelists want to contribute?
I'll round it out a bit too. Yeah, I really thank you for calling that out, Rebecca, too, because I was like, cringe. And Stephen, to your point, right? Like the intent was probably good. We need to have these conversations, but it is so as we're as we're pushing the envelope on our understanding and on, being more inclusive and stuff too, we're going to make those little like things. But yeah, I totally cringed at that. I was like, no, we don't need to qualify her vibrancy. She can just be vibrant, not vibrant at a certain age. I think this workforce question is so fascinating to just even in looking at the future of work. A lot of the conversation around, especially in the tech space, is about AI and how is that going to change the future of work, and being really thoughtful as a culture about what role does work play in our lives, right? So there's obviously the capitalist narrative of GDP and productivity defined in a certain way, but I think coming at it from more of a psychological standpoint, making a broader definition of work divorced from the concept, ideally divorced from the concept of, having to make a living. Work is a really important part of how we spend our time, where we make meaning, where we derive our own identity and value, right? Like ideally, obviously there's a lot of caveats to this and barriers to this, but I think there's a conversation to be had. There's a possibility emerging with automation and AI coming, with longer lives and longevity, to have work lives that actually work for us, not for the bottom line of CEOs and and of companies. And thinking about, I know before we were on air, Rebecca mentioned too, for folks who are caregivers, whether of children or of parents or of dependent adults, you need different accommodations at work. You might have a gap in your resume, and why is that seen as a bad thing? Why is that seen as a mark against you? And so I'd really love to have this conversation as we're, Stephen, as you mentioned too, becoming more aware of the multifacetedness of all of us, having more opportunities to unmask, to choose when to claim, our identities, whether they're neurodivergent, around sexuality, around gender, around age, as it's becoming safer, slowly to do that. And we can have these conversations really defining, what do we want our work lives to look like? What role does work play that's meaningful in our life, from a young age of thinking about what school is like for children. And then I would say all the way to, when I worked in long-term care, so many of the folks who lived there wanted to help out, wanted to fold napkins and things. And there were all these like funny activities made up to satisfy that need of wanting to be a part of the community, a part of the work, a part of what's going on. And so I feel like I really like the idea of sort of pulling back on that workforce too, and really looking at a strengths-based approach of that's what we learned, where I worked. It's like, okay, what is possible? What can folks do? And then like meeting them there. So looking at all of our strengths, whether it's, all right, great, when we're younger, do all the recall stuff and all the fast processing, and then use some of that, older crystallized intelligence and emotional intelligence to make more meaningful decisions there, and just really focusing more on our strengths and where we can best fit in with each other.
Kyrié, I have to pick up on that because I've been thinking very carefully about what we do with volunteers in this country. Our identity in America is really workplace based. One of the first questions we ask when we meet someone is, what do you do? Where do you work? And so I've been thinking about how some people have said we almost infantilize volunteerism, helping people to have opportunities to lick an envelope or something. And I've been thinking about this wealth of experience and knowledge and expertise and talents after one leaves the workforce. And I've been thinking about especially the pandemic, which let so many people make a decision they might want to leave the workplace. And now what is there for them? So I've been really thinking about, should we re-look at volunteerism, the giving back through service in your community, and come up with new paradigms? Because I think we're sort of shortchanging some of the potential. And that's something I'm going to start working on now as I look at the changing post-workplace possibilities.
Go ahead.
As Kyrié and Lily are both saying, finding places where people can fulfill their roles is so important. And whether that is sort of like a job role or something else, but for people living with dementia, this is still the case, right? So especially when we think about the earlier stages, mild cognitive impairment and early stages of dementia, there are absolutely ways that we can accommodate that in the workforce. And, beyond that, like Lily said, offering volunteer opportunities, but those opportunities really need to be connected to what the person sees as their role in life. It can't just be some random thing. So while for one person, folding napkins, which is a task that's often used, certainly in the long-term care facilities, which I've worked in as well, a lot of folding napkins. And for some people, they feel so fulfilled by that because they've had this life, maybe being a caregiver themselves, maybe taking care of a lot of children, making dinners at night, and maybe, they want to help in the kitchen, but they aren't offered, frankly, the accommodations to do that anymore. And so folding napkins does work for them, but not for everyone. And we certainly can't ever assume that something that works for one person is going to work for everyone else. But by meeting them where they are, understanding their role, and offering accommodations and support, they can still continue to contribute in ways that are genuinely meaningful.
That was very, very well said. And if there not any other panel, any other panelists input to this question, I'm going to elaborate a little bit myself. Panel, anything else? All right. So when it comes to volunteering, I volunteer for the American Red Cross, and that has it. And just a quick story. The reason I volunteer for the Red Cross is because I've been, impacted by hurricanes over the years, and the Red Cross, pulled up on me, and it was like, my power was out, and they brought ice and they brought food, and kind of helped with the overall infrastructure, and that really impressed me. So I started volunteering with them as a disaster action team member, which is basically going in and assessing disasters, whether they be small, like single family fires, or whether they be large, like hurricanes or floods. The American Red Cross, really does a lot to impact people. And a lot of our volunteers on the volunteer side are, they're probably 60 plus in age. And I did want to say that it is so important, the work that is done by that particular demographic, because they probably take up at least 70% of our volunteer force. So it is important for there to be an awareness that volunteering comes in many different ways, and that there are many different opportunities out there to volunteer. And being a volunteer versus being paid, for example, certainly does not negate your worth or negate your impact. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. I sometimes have a tendency of going down rabbit holes, but hey, I've been broadcasting for the last 30 years. So with that said, I want to remind everyone that you are listening to the Dean Talks, and we are having those exploratory conversations in real time in reference to multiple topics of neurodiversity. Now we're going to play another quick video before we continue this edition of the Dean Talks.
At the Beckman Institute at the University of Illinois, doctors are focusing their work on interventions, which are changes that can be made in a lifestyle to provide overall better health and a better quality of life as we age.
So we've been doing work for about the past 2 decades on the effects of physical activity and exercise on cognition and brain.
And our main focus is looking at ways to keep people and their brains healthy as they age.
We've been working with the older adults for about 2 decades. I like to think of them as healthy, old couch potatoes. So these are people that are pretty sedentary, just like most Americans.
So we're interested in developing ideas and interventions that we can use here in the lab and that can be then extended to people's real-world lives in order to basically help them stay independent.
They introduced an exercise intervention to this group, simply walking at an easy pace 3 times a week.
And we started out by examining changes in cognition as measured by paper and pencil tests and various computer-based tests of attention, various aspects of memory, decision-making, language processing, and something called executive control, which is what it sounds like: planning, scheduling, dealing with ambiguity, multitasking, and working memory. And what we found in terms of these cognitive measures is that anywhere from 6 months to 1 year of exercise, 3 days a week, 45 minutes a day, simply walking, will improve a number of cognitive abilities, often across the board, by about 15 to 20% in about 6 months.
Dr. Kramer is also exploring another intervention that involves physical movement as well as mental and social engagement. He has older participants involved in...
As you can see, there's just so much information. And, even in this conversation, we are just unveiling everything from, kind of scientific fact to life experience, whether we're dealing with, Western concepts or Eastern concepts, whether we're dealing with holistics or whether we're dealing with, some things that holistics can't necessarily deal with, like, for example, trauma. All of these different things fit together. And the point of me saying that is it boils down to diversity. Our true power is through diversity, the combination of all the experiences. And now, just look at things like Google Translate. Now the barriers of communication are broken down. Are we utilizing the access that we have through technology to its utmost potential? That's, kind of one of those things that makes you go, You're listening to the Dean Talks. My name is Stephen King, and I am your host. We have an excellent panelist with us today as we explore this topic of ageism, and that moves us along to our next question. Luminosity, Brain HQ, and Elevate are apps that promise brain training. It seems the research doesn't find that it is as helpful in battling cognitive decline as everyday learning and activities. And that's a nod to the video. Seems like there's more to it. Can we discuss what is and is not good for our brain as we age? Rebecca?
Thank you for this question. I think the simplest answer that I can give just to start is that apps like Luminosity, they're not going to hurt, but they're not the most effective way to support success with functional tasks and things that you actually want to do. So our brains are very plastic. There's the concept of neuroplasticity, and our brains can change in different ways. And we can still continue to learn, for example, even if we're living with a form of dementia. And so one of the principles of neuroplasticity talks about the fact that the thing that we're working on needs to be specific. And so if your goal is to get better at the Luminosity games, then you should totally play the Luminosity games. But if your goal is to be able to keep track of your schedule better, then I would recommend working on finding a planner that works really well for you. And I do think that another piece of this is that, and I feel worried I'm going to misstate this, but accepting the idea of aging and fearing it less, because if you think that something is scary, you're going to be more likely to walk away from it and not try to create accommodations for yourself and try to work on it. And you are more likely to try to just pick up a game, which again, doing things like crosswords, Luminosity, they're not going to hurt, but they just aren't the best way to help. And I think that when we accept changes, that's when we can learn to adapt. I do also want to say that, what is healthy is going to be really different for everybody. And so for someone, a certain diet might be healthy, and for someone else, it might not be. For someone, they might have exercise intolerance, and I might not be able to do certain forms of exercise. And so it's about knowing that and working with people, and also having medical professionals who are understanding of those issues and who can provide supports. And the clip that you played made me think about the fact that there are so many studies that are looking at the way that exercise can impact our cognition, which is absolutely the case. I was really excited recently when I learned about a study that's going on, I believe I want to say in Oregon. The woman's name is Dr. Croft, and she's a professor of neurology, and she's a medical anthropologist. And what she's doing is she's having older Black adults going on walks, and they're also talking about their histories because the neighborhood that they live in has changed so much. And so not only are they walking, getting exercise, but they're also telling their stories, and those are being recorded for posterity, as a living oral history. And I think that that's just a really incredible thing as well. I also want to say, I was taking notes I've been taking notes the whole time, and I have a notebook in front of me. And so I'm using that as an accommodation. And I think that that's just a really good example, right? We can use compensatory strategies, external memory aids, like a notebook, like taking notes. And that's okay. And I'm not embarrassed about the fact that I have to look down at my notes, because I get nervous during live things, and I'm going to lose words. And so I have my notebook here to help me. And I think that if we can just be open about the fact that we need these accommodations, that would be awesome.
Rebecca, I just want to jump on and just say I appreciate you being brave too, and saying something you may think might not be stated right, and just that I resonated with a lot of what you said. Yeah, especially there at the end of, these different like cognitive prosthetics or different, aids, accommodations are so helpful. And we use a lot of them without even thinking about it. And I love when there's a time where there can sort of be an equalizer, so even for folks who working from home was really helpful for them for, a variety of different health and psychological and personal situation reasons. One positive out of the pandemic is we realized, hey, guess what? We can actually be productive from home. And that was, able to be accessible. And we can normalize that by how you're saying, by sharing, that you're using a notebook. You all might notice I only have in one earbud. That's because this ear doesn't hear. And actually, I really love being on Zoom because I can, get the closed caption, and I can adjust the audio such that I can hear it and have those accommodations. And, the glasses I'm wearing, right, that's a prosthetic. A lot of us don't think about that we use an accommodation that has changed so much. But I also just really love what you said. One thing I want to bring up is there's an amazing psychologist who ended up dying pretty prematurely himself. And I wish he'd lived longer to see more of the work he'd done. But Tom Kitwood did some amazing work around dementia. And he's sort of was the first person I noticed who pointed out that we measure cognition a lot, that kind of working memory, because it's really easy to measure. Like, that's why we give kids standardized tests. That's why we use it in this stuff, and how Lily brought up too, like these cognitive tests are very racist. They are very classist. They speak to, and they're really easy to measure one part of how our brain works. And so something else I would love to see when we're thinking about our overall health, our overall memory is, who do we want to be as we grow older, and how can we set goals and measure our attainment of those goals? And absolutely, like Rebecca said, both our brains and our bodies are super adaptable across our lifespan. You can teach an old dog new tricks. That is an ageist and incorrect saying. But we have to practice it. If we want to be able to pick up our great grandbabies, we better be picking up our children with good posture and developing those muscles and, the things that we want to do with our brains and our bodies and our hearts and our emotions. I mean, I feel like you can tell I'm down a rabbit hole. I'm getting so excited about this because it really applies to, whether you're thinking about processing difficult emotions and applying mindfulness. We know that we can, Tara Brach talks about turning states into traits. If we want to be more calm, if we want to be more nourishing and loving to ourselves, we have to practice that. And practicing it does actually turn it into a trait, a character trait of ours. We can develop a character that we want. Same with our brain. How do we want our brain to work? Do we want to be better at scheduling? Do we want to be better at cooking without recipes? What are the things we want to do? And then how can we set goals to train ourselves to achieve those? Same with our physical, ability and goals. Our bodies and minds and character are really adaptable. And so while, again, I love like luminosity is not going to hurt, especially if you want to be really good at the luminosity app. But to being mindful about who are we and what are our actual goals, and then getting professionals and, community around us to support us in achieving those.
Excellent points. I'm always a little scared as a family caregiver when everyone starts to point us towards APP, as the Chinese say, an app, because I think the intergenerational nature of today is one of the things that I've been fighting for, which is being together in community. And the thought of doing apps makes me think about someone sitting there either with their smartphone or in front of some sort of laptop alone, segregated by age. And so I keep thinking about, how do we as a society, as communities, as neighborhoods, bring people together in age diverse and ethnic diverse, faith diverse diversity? Because I think the human touch is something that we have definitely demonstrated is critical throughout the pandemic. So something like this, where we're intergenerational, bringing together different generations to talk and learn from each other, is so key. And I've been thinking about the concept of having elders retire towards campuses is brilliant, where they can be auditing or taking courses with younger folks and having not age segregated and not just scientific APP-based learnings. There's got to be something where there's a human community that's formed.
This topic really resonates for me and resonates at the Right Proof Foundation, and I'll tell you why quickly. We are currently working on a project to gauge how we can use innovation across various demographics. And we're certainly focusing on the older demographic as well as the younger demographic. So it's interesting because, you know, these apps or this technology does have a place. However, that place, it cannot overrepresent human contact. And I think certainly COVID, you know, brought to bear, you know, a lot of questions that we didn't have or didn't even know to ask about how does this virtual space really impact cognitive development and learning, which is better, what is worse. So the conversation, you know, constantly continues. With to go back a little bit further, the apps and the technology certainly does not replace, I'm talking about for mental aptitude coaching, I guess would be a way to put it, certainly does not replace getting out there and engaging with the community, whether it be, I mean, we didn't have apps, we didn't have computers 50 years ago, so this was not an option. Yet people were still able to develop their minds by interacting with their communities, doing their, you know, gardening, their farming, their conversations, and all of those things also play a role in aptitude maintenance, I guess would be a way to move forward. Anyway, I'm trying not to go down a rabbit hole, so I'm going to stop and we're going to continue. Is there any other panelist contribution to this question?
Even if I may, Ryan, whatever app I'm using, I want your voice on it. It is just wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I certainly do appreciate that. And I have an issue with taking compliments because I'm very shy and I have stage fright. I don't have stage fright, but thank you so much for the compliment. We have another video as we continue this edition of the Dean Talks.
Excuse me. Hi everybody, how you doing? I'm 4 years old. I got a riddle, but no, I got a question. You ready? What's Wonder Bread so curious about? What's a recession? Why my mama tired all the time and she says it's because of recession, but then she says she didn't want it. She didn't want it. What she take it for? I got another question. I'm 6 to be man in front of my house. Sometimes he smell and look crazy, but he said I got his eyes and he my daddy. Mama said he ain't allowed inside the fisto. What's a junkie? I'm 8. I cut grass in the summertime to help mama out with money. She let me keep some up for candy. Though this boy came by up and they offered me $50. Take him back down the street for him. Mama chased him away though. What's blood money? Mama lost her second job the other day because she overslept from the third, but she said it's okay. It's not that the electricity been off for a couple weeks. She just thought maybe we like candles for a little bit. It is not that we had no food to eat. She just thought maybe the soup down at the shelter was better for a while, but I didn't believe it though. So I found that boy with them bags. I told him I was ready. What's low middle income? I'm 10. As the boys jumped me and took the chain that the boy I worked for gave me. I cried a little bit. Boy I worked for though, he hit me and said, man, no crap, punk. And he handed me a gun. It was heavy. What's a father figure? I'm 13, and the boy I worked for gave me my first. That was scary. The boy I worked for though, he said, it's cool, dog. Everybody's scared the first time. Then we saw the kid took my chain a while ago. He handed me the gun and said, it's cool, dog. Everybody's scared the first time. What's the rite of passage? I'm 15 and got my own corner now. You look at me outside because your son just graduated. Guess what? We both just graduated. Question, where's no child left behind? I'm 20 when I'm doing my second bid. Man, 10 years ain't shit. My brother here, my father out of the yard. He's in a jail time, nigga. It's a family reunion, son. I needed a break. Question, y'all come on, take the phone call and money I send you. Boy, I got cable and Nike in here. Yo, you not looking at that rain, punk. I'm 30 years out of jail. What? 35. Work today, pay today, man. You're late for son. You cash check at the corner store. You spend check at the corner store. Smoke the same shit I used to sell, baby. Question, yeah, what's quarter of the child support? What's the hustle? What's the health insurance? What's a homeless shelter? What's the sleeping homeless on the same block I used to run out 40, a little strung out right now, about to rob me, y'all at gunpoint at this place. I'll tell you what, I ain't gonna kill you, man. So this question for me, you ready? What was the name of the 10 speed I had? Was it orange? Did it have ghosts or wings? Did it have spokes like strings, like guitar strings? Did they play pretty, play nice? Did they have friends? Were we friends once? I lose you and you lose me. I lose you, that someone. Remember that summer, that fire, that rose? That's phony woman that laughed at me. That Ohio, sitting in the White House porch, that watching the ladies that what did it. All the ladies from all stuffed up your nose. And yesterday stuck me out your throat, afraid to breathe, scared to swallow. Your belly's so full of butterflies. You forgot when you left your wings. You lose all wings. In the back of Jim Crow, Jim Brown, all that black women. When Jesus coming back? I'm tired of being tired. How come I can't hear the Wells gospel no more? Who stole my ocean? Who stole the perfect circle? Her mama tired of times because she dead. I the drugs so good, so she's understanding beside me. My kid was like to be crap work to baby her forever. Yeah. I was 4 years old. I got a question. What the man so curious about, huh?
What we're going to do is we're going to place at rightfruit.org the link to that video so that you will be able to, take some time and look at some of the closed captioning. But I do know that the passion that was exhibited from that artist was something that was palatable. All right. Very good. So as a society that is becoming woke, how can we shift and how we value people of a certain age, placing them in places where they can succeed and ensuring their voice and expertise are represented across all industries? Lily?
If I may, a little while ago when I made my joke, I talked right over Ryan. I think it's important for him to finish his thought because on the other question, he wanted to make a point. So please let me first hand the mic over to Ryan.
Thanks, Lily. So I just wanted to say, I wanted to touch on two things, actually. So what you were talking about, Rebecca, about avoidance, I think is so important to look at because there's an avoidance of thinking about aging, to accepting our changing brains as we age, and that leads to stress around it. And it's sort of like a catch-22, a paradox of where they feed into each other, and the avoidance leads to stress, which leads to avoidance, which leads to stress. So I think there's an acceptance that, Lily, what you were talking about being in environments with all ages can really remedy. When you're around older people, for me at least, I started to realize, wow, okay, they lead, these older folks that I'm spending time with lead really interesting, engaging, important lives. Like, it made me less afraid of aging and helped me to accept aging more. And then the other thing that I just want to say about, how can we keep our brains healthy as we age, it really speaks to how we can keep our entire bodies healthy as we age. And that is socializing. By far, people are always interested when I talk about how I work in aging. They say, well, how do I stop it? And that's, I say, oh, well, that's not really what I work on. But if you want to live a long, healthy life, the most important thing to do is to have really great social networks. So those are just the 2 points that I wanted to make. So thanks, Lily, for bringing me back into the conversation with that.
Oh, most important, because it leads perfectly into my answer for the very interesting question. Especially, I want to acknowledge, thank you for playing that beautiful video. It stresses in my mind something that even though I didn't grow up reading Confucius, I did try as an adult to go back and learn more Chinese. And one of the things we studied was that. And I think his concept of concentric circles of influence, you can make a difference by having a good family. A good family can then help with the community. A good community can help with making a better, nation. And then better nations can help with making a better world. And so I was thinking that tied in with his concept of honoring elders. I read somewhere where someone wrote, we call them senior citizens. Do we call y'all junior citizens? So I think number one, as we've so brilliantly, my colleagues here on the stage have said, we have to change semantics first, thought processes along with that. and then this societal structure. So I've been thinking that if we could all have more intergenerational connections and use that concept of the Confucian, because look at what that video taught me, which is at every point that younger man needed an older person in his life, and whether or not that was the right role model made all the difference. So thank you for this chance to tie all this together.
Do we have any more panel contributions?
I have a quick thing to add, which is just that I think that it's important to remember that living a healthy, good life means something really different to everyone. And when we're less afraid of aging and mortality, we're more open to talking about the things that we want. And then we're more likely to be able to live well later on in life.
Again, just kind of recapping a little for this session of the Dean Talks. This has been so important to constantly push the conversation forward about ageism and so many things. And this is not really a super comfortable conversation to have because of just the subject matter. As you age, I can tell you myself, I certainly am a whole different person now in my age than I was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I feel that I contribute a lot, but I also make it a point to contribute a lot. And I think it's important for us to make sure that people have safe spaces, which is another project that Ripe Fruit is working on, to create and maintain safe spaces for conversations of all kinds. My name is Stephen, and I'm hosting the Dean Talks. Be sure and go to ripefruit.org, ripefruit.org, for information not only about this Dean Talk, but about Dean Talks that we've had in the past, as well as Dean Talks that are coming up in the future. This brings us now to kind of what we're going to call our poetry section. And I consider myself a bit of a poet, and I actually have a poem that talks about ageism, and I'm going to read that for you really quickly, and then we will continue with this session of the Dean Talks. The title of this poem is Life Declines the Mind. Life declines the mind. Life is a circle that we entrust to be spiritually guided and fair and just. We were designed to deal with loss. Time heals all wounds at no cost. The more severe the loss, the more time. This part of human nature is defined. You can be conditioned also, like a cop or a war hero. In some countries, a brutal life is what you see. Bombs removing legs below the knee, amputated by force, healed with time, prosthetics, rehab, and walking alliance. Loss of another person is a different thing. Just don't be selfish. Time heals the sting. The end of your own life you ponder with fear. Don't delay. Pray your way to be clear. You were designed to decline over time. As you grow older, more thoughts leave your mind. Now, death you no longer fear. Mental decline makes thoughts hard to steer. Humans used to live near 1,000 years, mind growing all the time. Check your Bible. Recorded fact justifies that line. Imagine life of 1,000 years, how smart you would be. When you died, life after death would still be a mystery. Would you be scared or prepared? That we would not know. It's gentle and kind to lose your mind and prepare for the next plateau. So that was authored by myself, and that was my poetry contribution to this edition of the Dean Talks. Next up is what it is that our panelists are up to. What are they working on? So panelists, we're going to go through and please provide your contact information while you're speaking, and we'll place that in the chat as well. So let's start with Rebecca. Rebecca, what do you have going on right
now? So I'm a speech language pathologist. I work in home care in New York, and I work for an agency. That's how I do it. And on the side, I'm trying to provide education and raise awareness about different types of dementia, the impact on caregivers and resources available. And I'm really trying to empower people with information because in my job, I see a lot of people who sort of the diagnosis dementia was just sort of thrown at them and then they didn't hear anything more. And yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do right now. I do have I post on social media about this under A Sweeter Course. And then I also have a website, www.asweetercourse.com, where I talk about these things as well. And on the side of that, I'm involved with Reimagining Dementia, which is like a coalition that's trying to reimagine dementia and find new ways to talk about it and see it and decrease fear and stigma around it. And I also sell baked goods to raise funds to pay caregivers to tell their stories, which I put up on my website as well. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure, and thank you for your contributions, definitely. Lily, how can people get in touch with you, and what are you working on?
Thank you all so much. First, thank you to Ebony for bringing us all together. This is exactly what we've been talking about, which is learning across different generations and also being in community. I myself started becoming an advocate for family caregivers just because of the tough course that I've had to go through. It wasn't easy. So basically, I've been trying to become a public speaker under the sort of canopy of turning from the dragging daughter, DRAGGING, dragging with fatigue, dragging with worry, but by empowering myself with resources and information, becoming the dragon daughter. So I found a 2-inch red dragon pin that I wear when I go on the stage. But the main thing is to let caregivers know they're not forgotten, that there are people fighting for them, because more and more of us in American society are going to become that. So just thank you all so much for the chance to bring a family caregiver's perspective to all this.
And thank you for your contribution to this Dean Talk. This has just been enlightening. Kyrié?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, sort of as I said in the beginning, education is my biggest focus. So I teach both college, both graduate and undergraduate courses. I'm also an educator for the Eden Alternative, which is really helping culture change education within long-term care. But then the biggest project that I work on, which will overlap with Ryan, is oldschool.info. That's the easiest place to find me. My jury is still out on social media, like do the costs and benefits, how do they outweigh each other? So the easiest way to find me is through Old School. We do have someone who helps us out with that social media there. And yeah, at Old School, our goal is to collate and curate all of the best resources about ageism into one place. So they're really easy to find, really easy, organized, and searchable. So to help disseminate, that information to reduce that barrier, and then also to catalyze movement building activities. And so we do a lot of stuff sort of around both resource creation and movement building. We create DIY workshop kits. We have one about ageism, one about the intersection of ageism and ableism, and a couple more in the works, and a bunch of other, there's hundreds of resources on there. And another really awesome thing we do, favorite part of my week, is we do weekly office hours on Wednesdays at 1:30 Eastern on Zoom, and it's just an open forum. Ryan, Ashton, and myself are usually all there. I think we said one of us would always be there, but we all like it so much, we're usually all there. And it's just this cool community where some people are there every week, some people drop in, and you get to ask anything about ageism and just unpacking this stuff exactly like we've been doing here in a space where it's okay to say the wrong word or to explore what you mean about a word. And yeah, that I'm really passionate about Old School, and I'll let Ryan maybe share a little bit more about that as well.
Okay, Ryan?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyrié, and everyone. for being here. This has been a fantastic conversation. Yeah, and I love having conversations like this one, which we definitely have at office hours and in other contexts. Yeah, so a lot of work that I do is running Old School, getting the new resources that come out every month or every few months up on the site. And then I also do a lot of work in my own community. I'm based in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. And so it's a bilingual community, more than bilingual. There's a lot of different languages that are spoken there. So I'm working on learning French right now to work more within that community. And yeah, I'm working with a few community organizations, Anglo community organizations in that field, working on intergenerational projects, trans projects, and I also work part-time as a caregiver, and I give workshops through Old School and on my own.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan, for being here. Your insight, again, is just invaluable to this conversation. A reminder, as I've been saying throughout the Dean Talks today, go to ripefruit.org for more information. Go to ripefruit.org to contact our speakers. Quick nod to social media. We do have social media platforms out there, whether they be Instagram, Facebook, etc. And at our last tally, which was probably about a month or so ago, we had well over 100,000 impressions on social media. So the word is getting out there, and ripefruit.org and the Ripe Fruit Foundation are certainly driving a positive message to continue this line of communication. We are now going to turn this over to Ebony Kinney, who will help us with our big hits and takeaways from today's Dean Talks. Ebony.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And thanks to each and every one of the panelists, first of all. It's just so humbling that you all come to this conversation, open minds, open hearted. And I know the work that you all are doing over at Old School, Kyrié and Ryan, it's great that you took some time away. Thank you for taking some time away to come work on some Ripe Fruit stuff. Lily, if you tell Lily something you're interested in or some work you're working on, she's a resource and a network all within herself. So I'm so grateful for you. And Rebecca is putting out such quality content in and around the dementia space and just helping people, I think, to just feel comfortable and their content to feel approachable. Really grateful for you answering the call. So some big hits that I took away right off the top. Kyrié told us about the 6 domains of cognition. So we have homework. Then Rebecca went to talk about how it's we're more likely to get it if we go off of bad information. And that conversation unpacked more throughout this session when we talked about how fear and just bad knowledge can just lead to us being ending up in a worse state. Memory loss is not a presenting symptom. News to me. So I definitely wanted to pull that out. Ryan talked about labels and the usefulness of it and just making a conscious decision, not necessarily letting someone else label you, but making a conscious decision, taking that control and power to decide which labels you move with and looking at our language. Innovation can happen as we change, I heard. And othering is bad for business, which I loved. And the bullying, I use that term bullying all the time. So as we understand othering and othering the other and just, paying attention to those things, I think it's just important that we help people to understand that. I was glad it came out in this conversation. I heard Ryan talk a little bit about people begin to focus on the wrong things. So like redirecting the focus. It may not be you who it's happening to. You may be in the room, you may be within earshot, but you being a part of turning that ship in that conversation to focus on the right things would make all the difference in the world to someone who doesn't feel they have a voice there. You all talked about, is it about doing the most in the shortest period of time? Are we computers? And I say this all the time. No, we are humans. Like, let us be human. Let us touch and connect and have autonomy, please. The code has been written. Lily talked about masking, paying attention when we're doing it, paying attention to the slightest of ways that we could be doing it. Rebecca pulled out ageism that may be happening in our language, talking about energy. Ryan talked about sharpness and looking for qualifiers. Kyrié mentioned automation and longer lives beg us to look at, shouldn't we just be looking at having a work life that we can do for a long period of time? So those paradigms are changing. Crystallized intelligence, I heard, and infantilizing, I'm butchering that, but volunteerism. Just, why is volunteerism looked at as something that the kids do, that the babies do, that maybe it's not as valuable? There's a real experience. So I love, for example, that federal government allows you to bring volunteerism into your work resume. And so things like that, pervasive throughout the industry, would be helpful. I'm coming to a close, but it was so many gems there. Rebecca talked about accommodating dementia, even with your tone shift and just being more human. Conflict management, I think, is also a part of that conversation. Can we still learn even with dementia? Yes, we can still learn and retain new information and new tasks even after we've been diagnosed with dementia. Again, kind of news to me. The best methods have to do with what it is you want to improve. And personalizing your accommodations. You all talked about the things that help you. Google Docs is my personalized accommodation. If I don't have Google Docs, I can't even attend this meeting. Avoidance of thinking about aging can lead to stress. And then Steve's poem certainly helped us to accept aging and kind of, celebrate it, I feel, in a way. And then you talked about, what if we were 1,000 years old? How smart would we be? Which helps us to think about the cumulativeness of our knowledge. And that's a celebration of it. I think there's an equity sort of lens on that. So Right Fruit's work, as Steve mentioned, is working on lessons. So a lot of the things that we talked about during the session, I could definitely see turning into lessons. I'd love to talk about these tips for the specific demographics that we brought out today, especially those that are in the workforce still, especially those that maybe are just experiencing first signs of dementia. We talked a lot about standardized testing, which is a mission also. I think there should be an audible version to the standardized testing. So like developing that and putting this think tank into that and testing it is all that we're trying to do here. So we invite you to be a part of that. Apps can age segregate was a good point. And where is the human community? So, and Steve's voiceover needs to be in the app. I'm gonna let that be my closing note. If you are a teacher or teachers, we have a survey that I'm gonna put in the chat, and I'm also gonna launch a poll for those of you that have been on the panel and have attended today. So thanks. I'm gonna turn it back over to Steve.
Okay, thank you, Ebony. And all of this is, started kind of with Ebony, driving the bus through Right Fruit Creative, which was an ad agency, and that has just spawned because of I'll tell you a quick story. So from the ad agency side, the advertising agency side, which is Right Fruit Creative, Ebony and I decided that we were no longer just going to do just regular ad agency stuff. We weren't going to design any more billboards. We weren't going to design any more business cards or websites or any of these, kind of mundane functions. We literally, every client that came, we screened them. They weren't screening us. They didn't know. And we decided that we were only going to do work that impacted the greater good. And so Ebony had on her mind about how diversity and equity could be pushed forward as kind of our mission. And we did a hard shift. We turned the bus hard left, and we have not left that space since then. And that was more than that was a couple of years ago. And now we have rightfruit.org, the Right Fruit Foundation, the Dean Talks, and this is where we spend our energy now, is pushing and using our resources and our expertise to drive these type of conversations versus just driving that, as we referred to earlier, that capitalistic model. So I want to, thank you, Ebony, for bringing forward the, not only Right Fruit Creative, but this Right Fruit Foundation. These are very passionate conversations, and I can say that this is my favorite time. Well, no, it's actually my second favorite time. My first favorite time is our weekly meetings, but my second favorite time is hosting the Dean Talks, because this is so important. And I just can't stress enough how appreciative of the panel I am for bringing your expertise to bear on this very dynamic topic. With that said, you have been listening to the Dean Talks. My name is Stephen King, And this has been a presentation of the Ripe Fruit Foundation. At ripefruit.org, you can certainly find contact information for our esteemed panel. You can also find out what is Ebony Kinney up to. Visit ripefruit.org for more information. And that will conclude this session of the Dean Talks. Thank everyone for attending, and thank you for just being a part of this process. We'll look forward to seeing you in a couple of months. Go to ripefruit.org for the upcoming Dean Talk schedule and for your chance to catch up with this esteemed panel. Ripefruit.org. My name is Stephen King. On behalf of the Ripe Fruit Foundation, I want to bid all of you, our listeners, as well as our panelists, have a great day, and we'll see you down the line.